Though archaeological layers reveal no definitive sequence that aligns cleanly with Ajunta's stylistic evolution, this mismatch becomes yet another place where evidence slips away from interpretation. As pigment analysis advances, researchers uncover traces of lapis lazuli, red and yellow ochre, malachite, charcoal black, and organic binders derived from plants and minerals whose sources hint at trade routes stretching across regions. Threads of cultural connection implied, but never fully documented. The iconographic programs grow richer across periods. Bodhisattva figures increase in scale, narrative density multiplies, ornamental motifs become more elaborate, and compositions expand to fill entire chambers with layered symbolism. Yet the question persists, why do some caves remain unfinished? Their pillars only roughly shaped, their sanctuaries marked by shallow recesses abandoned mid-carving? Scholars propose shifting patronage, political instability following the decline of the Vakatakas, or practical interruptions in monastic life. But the truth remains dispersed among hints rather than certainties. In this mingling of artistic mastery and abrupt silence, Ajunta acquires an enduring atmosphere, an equilibrium of revelation and withholding. Its craftsmanship is abundantly present in every curve of stone and every surviving brushstroke. But its logistical realities and historical context remain partially transparent, partially obscured. Tool marks, pigment layers, chisel patterns, and architectural geometry tell one story. Pauses in construction, abrupt stylistic shifts, and half-finished chambers suggest another. Between them lies a field of interpretation where evidence and speculation coexist, not as contradictions, but as complementary reminders of how much remains unrecorded. The ravine amplifies this quiet mystery. The Wagra River's horseshoe bend cradles the cliff while simultaneously isolating it, shaping both the spiritual environment and the logistical challenge of maintaining such a vast artistic endeavor. One wonders how an elaborate cultural project sustains itself in a location reachable only by narrow paths traversing unstable slopes, especially when major inscriptions are sparse and administrative details nearly absent. Who coordinated supplies? Who fed the workers? Who ensured continuity when monsoons halted progress for months? The site stands as proof that complex human systems once operated here, but leaves the mechanics of those systems largely unspoken. As one walks deeper into caves, the interplay of shadow and surviving color introduces yet another dimension of uncertainty. Were reflective surfaces used to guide light into the recesses? Were lamps positioned deliberately to dramatize certain scenes during rituals? Or were murals meant to be seen only in the soft, flickering glow of monastic ceremonies, an atmosphere no modern visitor can precisely reconstruct? Time has weathered pigments, fractured surfaces, and altered every shade, yet the underlying design remains legible enough to sense intentional unity across centuries. A unity that is understandable, yet feels just out of reach, like a melody remembered but never fully sung. Ultimately, Ajunta does not present itself as a miracle beyond explanation, but as a residue of a highly sophisticated artistic and organizational system whose operational details were never written down. What we see is undoubtedly human, planned, executed, revised, but also incomplete in the historical sense. The caves invite confidence in the artisan's skill, while also leaving space for questions. How were these massive undertakings scheduled? How were workers trained? How did doctrinal shifts influence the evolution of forms? These unanswered questions are not failures of archaeology, but part of Ajunta's quiet power, a reminder that ancient worlds often operated through a blend of practical knowledge, spiritual intention, and artistic ambition that does not always survive in text. And so the caves remain suspended between material certainty and historical silence, a monument shaped not only by chisels and pigments, but by centuries of changing vision, forgotten labor, and the natural forces that continue to breathe through the ravine. Far to the east, rising from the coastal plain of Odessa, like the fossil and idea half-remembered, the Konark Sun Temple stands as another testament to ambition etched into stone. Its chariot-form, with 12 massive wheels on each side and sculpted horses straining forward, provides an immediate metaphor for motion and celestial energy. Yet the more one examines its surviving fragments, the less straightforward its meaning becomes. Although 13th century inscriptions clearly articulate its dedication to Surya, the solar deity, They offer only glimpses into how such a vision was translated into a temple whose very architecture appears to move across the earth. Much of the original structure has collapsed. The towering sanctum that once dominated the skyline now survives only as the plinth and fragments of carved blocks. The mandapas that once rose in sequence now stand in partial ruin. Salt-laden winds, monsoon rains, coastal erosion, and centuries of shifting groundwater have shaped the temple as insistently as the sculptors who carved it. Archaeologists attempt to reconstruct the original plan using scattered stones, early colonial descriptions, and comparative studies, yet much remains uncertain. The great stone wheels, often cited as timekeeping devices, reveal geometric precision but no definitive inscription explaining their intended function. Some shadows cast by spokes align intriguingly with solar cycles, yet whether these were intentional features or symbolic flourishes remains unknown. The temple's overall eastward orientation suits the rising sun, but scholars still debate whether its missing shikara once shaped light in specific ritual patterns that cannot now be fully reconstructed. The surviving assembly hall, the Jagamohana, presents another puzzle. Its core-belled roof and massive stone beams remain intact while the main tower collapsed at some unknown point in history. Explanations range from corroded iron reinforcements to structural overloading to centuries of incremental erosion, but none fully account for the distribution of debris noted in historical accounts. This gradual, almost organic disintegration complicates efforts to understand the engineering logic that once balanced extraordinary weight when architecture defined by motion, the rolling wheels, the horses, the rhythmic sculptural friezes depicting dancers, musicians, celestial guardians, and scenes of courtly life. The sculptural program itself raises further questions. While many motifs follow established iconographic patterns, others appear at unexpected heights or orientations, indicating possible shifts in artistic leadership, patronage, or ritual emphasis during construction. Inscriptions mentioning multiple phases lend support to this idea, though they remain sparse and insufficient to map the full creative process. One of Konark's most persistent legends describes a massive iron or magnetite lodestone placed atop the main tower, allegedly influencing ships' compasses. Though no archaeological proof has confirmed this, the story reflects the temple's capacity to generate myth in the gaps where stone has fallen away. Yet the widespread use of iron clamps and dowels throughout the surviving architecture shows that the builders employed metal in sophisticated ways. Even knowing that coastal conditions threatened corrosion, some clamps endured, others failed, perhaps contributing to the tower's decline. The temple's vulnerability to the sea also shapes its enigma. Historical records suggest that the shoreline once pressed much closer to monument, and shifting sands may have jeopardized its foundations. Later restorations altered drainage systems and landscape contours, making it difficult to distinguish original engineering solutions from later interventions. Despite these uncertainties, the temple remains legible as a vast ritual machine, its processional paths, sculpted guardians, and choreographed spaces suggesting a dynamic ceremonial life. But reconstructing the full sensory experience, especially the interplay of light, sound, and movement, is challenging without more complete remnants. Konark thus stands at the meeting point of brilliance and incompleteness. Its geometry precise, yet its purpose partially hidden. Its craftsmanship undeniable, yet its narrative scattered. Its fallen tower speaks of both ambition and fragility. And through these fragments, the temple preserves a quiet mystery, not because it defies explanation, but because time has erased the final chapter of its story, leaving only enough evidence to admire, question, and imagine. Along the wind-shaped coast of Tamil Nadu, where granite cliffs face the relentless Bay of Bengal, the Mahabalipuram shore temples rise with a starkness that blends architecture and erosion into a single gesture. Their worn silhouettes suggest structures shaped not only by human hands, but by centuries of salt, storm, and shifting sand. Yet beneath this weathered surface, their layout reveals a coherence linking them to a broader network of Pallava-era rock-cut caves, monolithic rathas, and unfinished sculptures scattered across the ancient port town. The complex hints at a coordinated architectural vision, one shaped by religious devotion, maritime identity, and the demands of carving granite that resists both tool and time. The main temple, aligned eastward toward the rising sun, appears simple at first glance, but closer study reveals a dense matrix of sculptures, guarding lions, recumbent bulls, deities tucked into compact sanctums, arranged with precision suggesting multiple phases of construction. Some expansions were likely driven by evolving ritual needs, others by the encroaching sea, which over centuries pushed inland, submerging earlier layers of the coastline. Offshore surveys revealed dressed stones beneath shifting sands, hinting at additional structures now claimed by the ocean, though distinguishing ancient architecture from natural formations remains a challenge. The legend of the 7 pagodas, recorded by medieval travelers, persists despite limited textual evidence. Yet the endurance of this idea reflects a human impulse to complete patterns that fragmented history leaves unfinished. The same impulse that makes these temples, shaped by both craftsmanship and erosion, feel like a whisper from a larger architectural landscape only partially preserved. What happens when entire mountains are carved downward into temples without a single misjudged strike? When pigments brushed onto cave walls in near darkness still glow with life centuries later? How did ancient architects shape stone wheels the size of rooms, raise towers balanced on impossible ratios, or align whole cities with rivers, monolithic boulders, and the pathways of the sun? And why do so many of these places, Kailasa, Ajanta, Konark, Hampi, Khajuraho, and others, preserve traces of unfinished intentions, sudden shifts in design, and narrative absences that feel like whispers of forgotten plans? In India's ancient megastructures, the stones speak with clarity, but their deepest meanings hover just beyond reach, suspended between evidence and imagination. Carved into the volcanic flank of the Deccan Plateau, the Kailasa temple first appears almost straightforward, a monumental homage to Shiva, sculpted directly from living basalt. Yet the longer one studies its surfaces, the more its presence feels like a question posed across 12 centuries. Its builders chose not to assemble but to excavate, descending from the summit downward, as though inverting the entire logic of architecture, a method that required absolute foreknowledge of every void, every structural beam of stone, every final contour before the first chisel ever touched the mountain. This bold commitment to negative space becomes a key to understanding its enigma. Inscriptions credit the Rashtrakutas, but offer only faint outlines of the process. Nowhere do they explain how artisans removed hundreds of thousands of tons of rock while preserving delicate colonnades, freestanding pavilions, and an immense monolithic vimana with near-surgical accuracy. The temple feels less constructed than revealed, a shape uncovered from the earth rather than composed upon it. Its courtyards, galleries, friezes, and plinths belong to the same continuous body of stone, a single mass persuaded into architectural form through dexterity and vision that seem impossibly coordinated. Archaeological traces, tool marks, abandoned sections, shifts in surface finish, are fragmentary clues to a larger method now lost. They hint at teams working simultaneously on multiple levels, perhaps guided by models or mental blueprints never recorded. No surviving text describes how ancient engineers ensured vertical alignment when carving downward, or how they anticipated hidden fractures in basalt. Modern scholars imagine a mixture of experience, improvisation, and incremental verification, a dialogue between artisans and geology conducted entirely in stone. Across the temple, alternating patches of rough and polished surfaces record shifting priorities. Phases when resources thinned, leadership changed, or external pressures intervened. Some chambers boast complete narrative cycles. Others halt abruptly, their first grids of chisel marks still visible. Porticos appear half-planned. Interior corridors seem to pause in mid-thought. These inconsistencies reveal not impossibility, but humanity, moments when political will, economic strain, or ritual reorientation shape the direction of chisels. Yet, even with these irregularities, the temple maintains the grammar of classical Dravidian proportions. It follows canon, but through subtraction rather than assembly, a rare synthesis of sculptural logic and architectural order. Nowhere is this more striking than in the central shrine, where the linga sits directly beneath a towering monolithic superstructure carved from a single continuous mass. Whether by intention or necessity, this continuity makes Kailasa feel less like a building placed in the earth and more like a geological form coaxed into divinity. Light intensifies the mystery. As the sun shifts across the day, its rays activate reliefs in a sequence that feels choreographed, illuminating certain figures only at precise moments in the annual cycle. Some argue these alignments were deliberate. Others believe them incidental, yet they imbue the complex with a sense of temporal rhythm, as though architecture and cosmology were meant to converse in silence. Colossal stands today as both presence and absence, a masterpiece of human skill, yet partially unreadable in the absence of written guidance. What remains is monumental certainty paired with historical silence, a reminder that even the most sophisticated ancient projects leave shadows where intention escapes record. Further north, carved into a sweeping basalt horseshoe above the Wagra River, the Ajunta Caves present a different kind of mystery. From the outside they appear simple, weathered apertures in a cliff formed by monsoon and time. But crossing any threshold transforms rough exterior into deliberate interior, a sequence of chichas and viharas shaped by centuries of patient excavation. The early caves embrace austerity. Clean lines, wooden prototypes translated into stone, barrel-vaulted ceilings that echo vanished timber architecture. Later caves erupt with ornamentation. Richly carved pillars, bodhisattvas rendered with tenderness, murals alive with courtly splendor and Buddhist philosophy. Yet the order of excavation remains speculative, as though artisans work not in a linear progression but in waves. Arrivals, pauses, abandonments, and resurgences shaped by dynastic fortunes and shifting doctrines. The murals are Ajunta's deepest enigma. Painted in low light, executed on wet plaster with pigments drawn from minerals and distant trade routes, they display mastery of shading, emotion, and spatial awareness. Modern researchers attempt to reconstruct their working conditions using oil lamps and reflective surfaces, but no experiment fully explains how artists achieved such precision under constraints that today would be considered unworkable. Clues lie in the caves themselves. Faint grids scratched beneath pigments, scaffolding holes placed not merely for support but for visual choreography, abandoned outlines that reveal the evolution of narrative ideas. Many chambers were excavated from multiple directions at once, requiring foresight to prevent structural collision, a feat of coordination rarely acknowledged. The chicha halls possess acoustics engineered, or at least inherited, to amplify chanting, turning sound into part of the architecture's spiritual architecture. Yet inscriptions remain sparse. Donors are named, but logistics are not. Questions abound. Who funded months-long pilgrimages to this remote ravine? How were pigments transported through precarious mountain paths? How did monastic communities reorganize after periods of political turbulence? The natural isolation of the site raises as many questions as it answers. The river's horseshoe bend both protects and severs, shaping a landscape where devotion flourished yet administrative details evaporated. Today, Ajunta offers clarity and distortion in equal measure. Pigments have shifted, surfaces flaked, shadows lengthened by centuries of exposure. Yet the artistic intention remains visible enough to sense a unity that transcends damage. A unity that feels carefully thought yet partially erased, comprehensible yet always receding into the dimness where artisans once worked. In the end, Ajunta speaks not of impossibility, but of complexity, a legacy built by human hands, guided by sophisticated planning, yet recorded only in stone and silence. Its unanswered questions do not diminish its truth, they deepen it, preserving an aura shaped by what survives and what does not. The caves endure as a landscape of artistry and ambiguity, shaped by centuries of shifting vision and forgotten labor, where every surface carries a fragment of a story too vast to ever be fully told. An instinct that archaeologists navigate carefully as they study submerged formations offshore, where rectilinear blocks sometimes appear beneath layers of sand and coral. Some seem shaped by intention, others merely boulders worn into suggestive forms by the cross-currents of centuries. Sonar scans and diving surveys reveal patterns, straight edges, right angles, parallel lines, but never enough context to assemble a complete blueprint. How many structures once lined this shifting coastline, and how many were taken by storms, tectonic tremors, or the slow retreat of the shore? The evidence feels like a half-erased sentence, its missing words drowned long before anyone recorded them. Moving inland, the cluster of monolithic rathas carved from single granite masses makes the technical choices of the Pallava artisans more legible. These chariot-like shrines show a spectrum of experimentation, rectangular plans, pyramidal tiers, apsidal contours. A catalog of Dravidian architectural styles rendered not through masonry, but through excavation. Subtractive carving that demands a complete mental map of the final form before a single chip of stone can fall, much like the approach at colossal, though here expressed at more intimate scales. Some rathas remain unfinished, their contours frozen mid-gesture, hinting at halted patronage or shifting royal priorities. Interruptions that echo the partially eroded and incomplete features of the shore temples nearby. Throughout this granite-strewn landscape, geology folds itself into the architectural story. The crystalline texture of the stone fractures under salt spray and monsoon winds, producing granular surfaces that obscure the original sharpness of sculptural detail. The stone's lost sheen, once bright enough that early travelers described the temples sparkling in sunlight, deepens a sense of distance between what survives today and the vibrant sacred complex the Pallavas once shaped. Time has softened what was once crisp, leaving only the ghost of an earlier brilliance. The orientation of the shore temples introduces further puzzles. One shrine dedicated to Shiva faces east. Another dedicated to Vishnu faces west. A symbolic axis from sunrise to sunset is the most intuitive explanation, though some scholars imagine maritime functions as well. This coastline once pulsed with international trade, and the twin silhouettes may have served as markers for sailors navigating unpredictable currents. Yet this theory, like many linked to Mahabalipuram, floats between possibility and silence, suspended by scarce textual evidence and an abundance of plausible interpretations. Inside the main shrine, centuries of ritual activity have polished stone surfaces and left faint abrasions where water offerings once trickled. Certain corners reveal the marks of early restoration. Replaced stones reinforce joints, slight shifts in sculptural rhythm. These interventions blur the lines between original Pallava workmanship and later repairs. Much of the temple's current form is a palimpsest, a layered record of devotion, erosion, and preservation. As tides advance and retreat, the complex feels perpetually poised between land and sea. Waves crash against the plinth, salt mist settles onto carved lions, and shallow pools form briefly before draining back into the ocean. This dynamic environment mirrors local legends of submerged temples and vanished cities. Stories unsupported by direct archaeological proof, yet grounded in the lived reality of a coastline reshaped continuously by storm and tide. Here, memory and erosion intertwine, leaving traces that resist definitive interpretation. Thus the shore temples stand as both evidence and remainder, their outlines shaped by human intention, their surfaces rewritten by coastal forces. Submerged foundations missing sculptures, unfinished rathas. These absences form a quiet space where historical reconstruction meets the limits of what can be known. Mahabalipuram endures not as a mystery of impossibility, but as a landscape where craftsmanship, geology, ritual, and time converse in unfinished sentences. Far inland, rising from the fertile plains of the Kaveri Delta, the Brihadisvara Temple presents an entirely different kind of complexity. Its towering Vimana commands a horizon with a confidence that seems absolute. Yet the closer one approaches, the more the temple reveals intricacies that resist simple narratives. While the inscriptions of the Cholas record festivals, land grants, and administrative details, they say little about the practical methods used to raise a granite tower more than 60 meters high. They illuminate the temple's world, yet remain silent on the mechanics of its creation. As one steps through the monumental gateway, the spatial logic of the complex begins to unfold. Vast courtyards giving way to dense sanctums, each arranged along an east-west axis that echoes ritual cosmology. The architecture feels both expansive and precise, as if designed to choreograph movement while reinforcing symbolic order. But the inscriptions never explain how granite blocks weighing several tons were hoisted to vertiginous heights. Scholars infer the use of immense earthen ramps stretching across the landscape, or elaborate pulley systems built from timber frameworks, methods consistent with contemporary engineering, though archaeological traces remain too faint to confirm. In the shadow of the Vimana sits the monolithic Nandi, carved from a single granite block and polished with meticulousness that still glows faintly beneath centuries of ritual water offerings. Its transport path is unrecorded, though geological analysis suggests a quarry somewhere within the region. Whatever route it traveled has been erased by shifting agricultural patterns and monsoon-fed sediment, leaving behind the sculpture but not the story of its journey. Inside the sanctum, the soaring vertical chamber amplifies chants with resonant precision. The height disperses heat from oil lamps while creating acoustics that shape the rhythm of ritual. These effects, seldom mentioned in text, must be inferred from architectural behavior, a reminder that practical design often exists outside written doctrine. Subtle temperature gradients, airflow patterns, and sound profiles all hint at technical intuition, now invisible in surviving records. Sculptural panels along the colonnades unfold tales of Shiva, celestial dancers, and mythic guardians rendered in the swirling, dynamic Chola style. Yet here, too, inconsistencies appear. Unfinished figures, abrupt transitions in carving depth, sections more refined than their neighbors. These variations imply phases of work that continued even after consecration, or the involvement of multiple guilds with differing hands and timelines. Subsidiary shrines show even more variation, their stone textures and carving styles suggesting later additions, renovations, or recontextualizations. Walking the cloistered corridors added under subsequent dynasties, the contrast becomes unmistakable. Hard Chola granite gives way to softer stones from later periods, each layer preserving a chapter of adaptation. What we call Bryadisvara is not a single moment frozen in time, but a continuum of construction, revision, erosion, and renewal. Beneath the architecture, proportions follow canonical principles. Yet scholars debate whether these ratios reflect strict adherence to treatises or flexible interpretation by experienced architects. The temple's drainage and water management systems add further ambiguity. Some channels are clearly Chola, others belong to later restorations, and the shifting delta landscape obscures how the builders originally regulated runoff in a flood-prone region. The temple's mysteries arise not from impossibility, but from incomplete documentation. Its logistics, sequencing, and construction techniques remain partly deduced, partly imagined. Scaffolding holes hint at vanished frameworks. Quarry marks whisper of routes and workshops now buried beneath fields. Weight distribution in the Vimana suggests careful calculation, yet the exact steps remain elusive. Bryadisvara stands as a monument to ambition and organization, to craftsmen whose knowledge was transmitted through apprenticeship rather than manuscript, leaving behind results but not recipes. Its unresolved questions form a quiet halo around its towering structure, allowing it to inspire wonder not through improbability, but through the layered complexity of human endeavor. And then there is Hampi, sprawling across a dreamlike landscape of colossal boulders, step tanks, and rivers that shrink into braided channels during the dry season. At first glance, geology dominates the scene. Granite heaps rise in improbable stacks, as though shaped by ancient titans. But as one moves between the ruins, a deliberate logic emerges. The planners of Vijayanagara did not impose a city upon this terrain. They absorbed it, weaving architecture into the contours of the land. Temples align with clefts in hills. Palaces nestle into natural terraces. Market streets spill outward like rivers mirroring the flow of the Tungabhadra. And it is this interweaving of the built and the natural that forms the first quiet thread of mystery. Not because the city of Hampi defies explanation, but because the logic of its planning stretches across enormous distances, blending ceremonial, defensive, hydraulic, and domestic needs into a single cultural landscape, without leaving behind textual instructions that detail how these layers once synchronized. Archaeologists reconstruct the city's rhythms from stone alignments, foundation traces, abandoned pathways, and the placement of temples and markets along axes that echo political ideology even as they adapt to the constraints of the terrain. Each architectural gesture suggests intention, but the full blueprint remains elusive. Walking through the Virupaksha temple complex, still a living shrine, one senses continuity threading through centuries. Yet this is only the beginning of a vast network of temples whose orientations and scales vary in ways that imply a planning system simultaneously hierarchical and adaptive. Major complexes anchor routes that once guided festivals and ceremonial processions, while smaller shrines nestle within crevices of boulder hills or sit beside ancient paths skirting the Tungabhadra River. Their placement may have followed geomantic principles, practical needs, or patterns now forgotten. The absence of any surviving planning manuals leaves room for multiple interpretations, an uncertainty that mirrors the uneven survival of the structures themselves. Further into the city, the great bazaars and pillared mandapas stretch across open plains once thick with traders, animals, musicians, and pilgrims. Their architectural vocabulary, granite colonnades arranged in orderly lines. Displays a balance and proportion that masks the immense logistics behind their creation. Each pillar required quarrying, transport, shaping, and alignment. Capitals carved with motifs now worn by wind still bear identifiable traces of lions, floral bands, and dancers. And woven among these market avenues lie the remains of sophisticated hydraulic systems, water channels, reservoirs, and step tanks whose engineering indicates both ritual intent and practical irrigation. Pushkaranis with flawless geometry still gleam with symmetry, but many conduits feeding them vanish beneath collapsed platforms or merge into natural depressions shaped by seasonal runoff. The Vijayanagra hydrological network remains only partly mapped, its balance between sacred function and irrigation strategy still under study. Within the royal enclosure, broken platforms and fractured walls hint at the administrative and ceremonial life that once animated the city. The Mahanavami Dibba, with its layered terraces, evokes a stage for ritual performances, courtly exhibitions, and diplomatic gatherings, yet the exact nature of these activities is difficult to reconstruct. Foreign travelers' accounts offer vivid impressions of festivals and royal splendor, but rarely describe the architecture itself, leaving the structures mute, while the texts speak only in generalities. The Lotus Mahal introduces yet another layer of ambiguity. Its curving arches and recessed chambers blend multiple stylistic traditions, suggesting a hybrid purpose. Without inscriptions, scholars debate whether it was a royal retreat, a council hall, or a pavilion associated with the queen's quarters. Each interpretation plausible, none definitive. Across the boulder-studded hills, monolithic sculptures, such as the colossal Narasimha and the massive Ganesha, figures stand alone, prompting questions about whether they once formed nodes in larger architectural compositions or were intentionally isolated to heighten their visual impact. Their scale and placement indicate careful planning. Yet the collapse of surrounding structures and centuries of erosion make their original context difficult to discern. These solitary forms remind us that Hampi's artistic program was deeply entangled with the landscape, making it harder for modern scholars to separate natural topography from planned spatial experience. The fortifications encircling the region add another dimension of complexity. Kilometers of walls snake across hills, incorporate natural boulders as defensive outposts, and weave through passes with remarkable efficiency. Their vastness points to a multi-tier defense strategy requiring enormous organization and labor, but surviving records document only fragments of the system. The timeline of construction, the exact strategic rationale behind each gateway, the coordination between military engineers and masons, all remain partly guessed through alignment patterns and comparative study. Throughout Hampi, the remains of daily life mingle with monumental forms. Residential clusters, workshops, granaries, and market stalls appear in arrangements that respond directly to the shapes of the terrain and the flow of movement between sacred and commercial spaces. The apparent irregularity of these neighborhoods conceals a deeper logic attuned to both ecology and economy. Despite extensive excavation, the city's organic layout defies precise reconstruction, challenging modern expectations of neat urban planning. Even in the best-preserved sites, mystery endures. The Hazararama Temple, with its narrative friezes depicting episodes from the Ramayana, appears intimately tied to royal ritual. Its compact scale and density of sculptural detail suggest ceremonial use by the court, yet its exact function, private shrine, royal chapel, or commemorative temple, remains uncertain. Hampi's architectural language offers abundant clues, but no single structure contains a key to decoding the whole. As the sun moves across the plains, shadows lengthen across pillared halls, broken mandapas, and silent pavilions. The landscape becomes a palimpsest, its fragments belonging to different eras, yet coexisting without clear boundaries. Structures built during imperial prosperity sit beside elements reshaped in the city's final years, alongside ruins altered by collapse, looting, restoration, or the slow sanding of wind and rain. These overlapping layers blur the timeline, making it harder to identify a singular moment of creation or decline. Hampi's mystery arises not from implausibility, but from incomplete survival. A city once alive with ritual, commerce, music, and politics now endures as an intricate puzzle missing enough pieces to resist total comprehension. Its stones testify to organizational genius, artistic ambition, and profound engagement with the land, yet they also bear the marks of interruption and erosion. What remains allows us to glimpse the scale of human endeavor, but never the full choreography of how these forms once converged into a vibrant capital. Across the Bundelkhand landscape, the Khajuraho temples rise from groves of neem and palash with silhouettes so precise they seem to transcend the earth beneath them. Their soaring shikaras and intricately carved panels are celebrated as masterpieces of Chandala art, yet the historical tapestry behind their construction, spanning generations, shaped by fluctuating political landscapes, and executed by guilds whose internal practices remain unrecorded, retains a quiet opacity. Their mystery does not lie in impossibility, but in the complexity of intentions layered across time with limited textual guidance. Approaching the Western group, where the Lakshmana, Kandariya Madhava, and Vishvanatha temples stand together in a constellation of stone, the initial impression is one of orchestrated symmetry. Their clustered towers rise like a petrified forest of peaks. But close examination reveals nuanced variations, differences in plinth height, tower curvature, decorative density, and sculptural rhythm. These variations suggest that multiple workshops worked under shared architectural principles rather than a rigid unified blueprint. Their coherence springs not from uniformity, but from a deep cultural grammar that allowed interpretive freedom within structured norms. Structured norms. Walking along the temple plinths, one encounters the full density of sculptural life. Divine figures, guardians, dancers, mythical beings, musicians, celestial couples, carved with remarkable fluidity, unfold along the Janga. Within their abundance lies subtle discontinuities, motifs repeated with small adjustments, stylistic shifts between panels, sections left slightly less refined. These marks reveal a process shaped by seasonal interruptions, rotating artisan groups, or shifts in patronage. The temples were not carved in a single sweep of unified effort, but through extended cycles of planning, negotiation, refinement, and adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests that in some cases foundations were laid long before the final superstructures were fully conceived. This modular approach aligns with an architectural culture comfortable with evolving ritual needs and changing political currents. Exact motivations remain debated, as no detailed workshop records or temple-building manuals survive from the era. Inside the mandapas and sanctums, spatial choreography guides the senses. Narrow passages expand into high-ceilinged halls. Filtered light soften stone surfaces. Acoustics amplify chants and create a subtle resonance beneath the rising shikara. Surviving treatises capture only broad principles, leaving modern observers to infer how ritual movement and architectural form once worked in tandem. Among the most enigmatic elements are the suras, the renowned sculpted figures whose grace of posture and ornamentation suggest a multi-layered significance. While aligned with themes of fertility, prosperity, and divine presence, their abundance at Khajuraho prompts questions about additional ritual or performative functions that may have once been obvious and are now lost. Beyond the well-known Western group, the Eastern and Southern clusters extend the architectural vocabulary. Jain temples here display different sculptural emphases, while smaller Shaiva shrines adopt simpler plans that hint at local patronage or later phases of Chandala influence. Yet even across this diversity, a consistent structural logic persists: elevated plinths, cardinal alignments, clustered towers, revealing an underlying architectural ethos even in the absence of explicit textual guidance. The surrounding landscape deepens the mystery. Medieval Khajuraho once dwelled within a network of settlements, reservoirs, and forested groves. Many of these environmental links have been obscured by ecological change, leaving temples that were once connected by processional routes now isolated in a modern setting. The decline in ritual use after the 13th century adds another layer of ambiguity. Demographic shifts, changing trade routes, military pressures. Any or all may have contributed, yet surviving chronicles remain vague. Archaeologists must rely on structural wear, collapsed mandapas, and later restorations to infer the trajectory of the site's gradual retreat from prominence. Despite centuries of exposure, Khajuraho's temples remain structurally stable, testament to sophisticated engineering, particularly in corbelled roofs and clustered shikara systems. Yet even this stability conceals forgotten methods, choices, and adaptations. Their stones speak clearly of craftsmanship, but only murmur the decisions behind it. Engineering clarity introduces its own quiet questions, such as how the guilds determine the precise ratios governing the vertical rhythm of the shikaras, or how they calibrate the placement of bonding stones hidden deep within temple walls. Structural surveys reveal these techniques today, but surviving texts offer no explanations, leaving a subtle divide between certain craftsmanship and uncertain method. And as evening gathers over Khajuraho, softening the contours of the carvings and stretching shadows across the step platforms, the temples feel like a convergence of meticulous planning and gradual forgetting. Their artistry is undeniably human, yet shaped by processes no longer fully visible. Their inscriptions speak clearly of purpose but remain silent on technique. And within this space between what the stones disclose and what historical memory has lost, the site sustains its lingering mystery, not through suggestions of impossibility, but through the recognition that even the most thoroughly studied monuments contain within their carved surfaces layers of decisions, adjustments, and vanished narratives that resist final interpretation. In this way, Khajuraho remains a testament to both medieval craftsmanship and the quiet endurance of unanswered questions. Rising from the dense urban weave of Madurai like a self-contained cosmos of towers, corridors, tanks, and ritual axes, the Meenakshi Temple presents an immediate visual unity that almost conceals the centuries-long accretion behind its present form. Today, the complex appears seamless beneath its towering gopurams, painted in vivid tiers of deities and guardians. Yet this seeming coherence masks a history shaped by layered construction, destruction, and renewal, guided by dynasties, shifting artistic vocabularies, and continuous thread of worship that adapted the temple's architecture without preserving a comprehensive record of how its spaces evolved. This interlacing of persistence and reinvention forms the starting point of the temple's quiet enigma. The granite foundations and core sanctums belong to early medieval phases, yet the monumental gateways dominating the skyline are largely Nyack period constructions, their polychrome stucco a later aesthetic overlay rather than the temple's original appearance. The result is a spatial palimpsest, where ancient stone corridors lead into mandapas filled with sculptures reflecting far later artistic sensibilities. These juxtapositions make it difficult to reconstruct a single architectural narrative. As one moves inward from the outer courtyards, the rhythm of the corridors alternates between wide and narrow, lined with hundreds of sculpted pillars whose varied forms hint at multiple guilds working across successive centuries. Inscriptions preserve the names of donors, kings, queens, merchants, but rarely describe construction sequences or techniques, forcing scholars to trace stylistic relationships through comparison rather than explicit documentation. The temple's concentric enclosures, aligned along cardinal directions, imply adherence to vasta principles. Yet differences in scale, ornamentation, and spatial logic suggest each expansion responded to its time, whether the swelling population of Madurai, the ambitions of Nyack rulers, or ritual needs shifting with the temple's evolving sacred calendar. The result is a structure that feels simultaneously ordered and organic, as though it grew outward through a long dialogue between intention and circumstance rather than following a rigid master plan. At the center lie the shrines of Meenakshi and Sundareshwara, their twin sanctums expressing a theological emphasis unique to Madurai. But even here the architectural sequence is partly obscured. Early inscriptions confirm an ancient tradition of worship, yet much of the visible superstructure likely reflects later reconstructions, meaning the forms we see today represent a stylized memory of earlier layouts rather than their original stone contours. This reliance on inherited tradition, rather than preserved blueprints, introduces gentle uncertainties into the temple's spatial history. In the famed Thousand-Pillar Hall, its name an expression of multiplicity rather than an arithmetic fact, the sculptural profusion offers another subtle puzzle. Mythological scenes, decorative motifs, and narrative panels appear with cohesive craftsmanship, yet their arrangement does not follow a strict linear program. Aesthetic aims may have taken precedence over narrative sequencing, where the hall may have served functions, ritual, administrative, performative, not fully preserved in surviving records. Its acoustics shape to diffuse sound evenly across the hall, hint at uses beyond static worship. Though textual confirmation is absent, interpretation hangs delicately between architectural evidence and speculative context. The golden lotus tank adds yet another layer. Its slightly irregular shape and modified channels suggest adjustments over time, perhaps reacting to monsoon shifts, urban drainage needs, or changes in ritual practice. Its calm surface hides centuries of hydraulic adaptation typical of large South Indian temples. Yet, without early engineering records, its evolution must be reconstructed from masonry variations and sediment patterns rather than explicit testimony. Beyond sanctums and tanks, the Gopyums dominate the skyline with waves of stucco figures repainted over generations. Their brilliant colors, so iconic now, mask earlier layers, obscuring the developmental history of their iconography. Beneath the paint lies a stone core largely inaccessible to close study, leaving questions about planning, labor organization, and repair cycles unanswered despite their monumental presence. Scattered throughout the complex are smaller mandapas bearing mismatched pillars, reused blocks, or partially recarved motifs, clues that fragments from older structures were incorporated into later phases of construction. This recycling, common in long-lived temple sites, introduces interpretive challenges. Each reused element raises questions about origin, former meaning, and the circumstances of its relocation, questions rarely solvable with certainty. Even the city beyond contributes to the temple's aura. Medieval Madurai developed in concentric rings around Meenakshi's sanctum, its streets aligned with the temple's cardinal axes in a pattern suggesting deliberate urban planning. Yet administrative mechanisms, land assignments, building protocols, ritual zoning, are recorded only indirectly. Much of the city's integrative logic must therefore be inferred through spatial archaeology and comparison with other temple-centered urban forms. As dusk settles across the courtyards, softening the colors of the Gopyums and casting long shadows across the granite floors, Meenakshi Temple reveals a continuity threading its disparate elements. Centuries of uninterrupted ritual, layers of space that retain meaning even as their original uses blur, and architecture decisions whose rationale may never be fully recoverable. Its mystery arises not from impossibility, but from the richness of a living monument shaped and reshaped by many generations, each leaving marks that illuminate and obscure in equal measure. Set within a quiet riverine landscape pattern, where the Sarasvati once flowed with greater certainty than it does today, Unravel descends into the earth with depth and intricacy that reveal themselves step by measured step. It seems designed not merely to store water, but to guide a visitor through a gradual transition from sunlight into a sculpted symbolic world below. This descent becomes the structure's first whisper of mystery. Stepwells across Western India share a similar functional purpose, yet the ambition and refinement here suggest intentions beyond practicality. Surviving inscriptions provide only fragments, names of patrons, dates of construction and repair, without detailing methods, workforce structure, or ritual motivations. Scholars must reconstruct its story from precision of its geometry and the density of its sculptural program. As the descent deepens, the stepwell widens into a multi-tiered corridor flanked by colonnades, each level adorned with hundreds of carved figures, avatars, celestial beings, guardians, mythological episodes. Despite this richness, the logic behind their arrangement remains partly opaque. Some patterns align neatly with cosmological themes. Others appear unexpectedly, suggesting a program shaped by artistic interpretation or evolving ritual concepts rather than a single, fixed blueprint. The sculptors worked underground, in narrow spaces where natural light was scarce and air circulation limited. Yet they achieved clarity and detail that survived centuries of burial under silt. Tool marks on lower pillars reveal stages of finishing, some fully polished, others retaining traces of earlier chiseling, hinting at interruptions caused by seasonal constraints, political shifts, or the ebb and flow of patronage. Partially carved motifs appear frozen mid-process, though whether due to resource shortages, flooding, or the sudden end of royal support remains uncertain. All of these irregularities coexist with a geometric consistency so precise that even after long burial and modern restoration, the structure's harmony endures. The alignment of steps, corridors, terraces, and panels follows ratios that imply an advanced architectural understanding. Yet no manual survived to explain how these calculations were taught or transmitted. Here again lies the quiet tension between visible mastery and undocumented method, a defining quality of Unravel's lingering atmosphere. The stepwell's inverted temple concept, in which descending levels mirror a symbolic journey towards sanctity, becomes most striking at the lowest surviving stages. Here, the well's shaft would once have reflected the open sky in its water, turning the deepest point into a locus where utility and symbolism converged, a place where surface and underworld met in a single shimmering plane. Yet the mechanisms that once governed the flow of water, channels, filtration systems, overflow controls, have been obscured by centuries of sediment and by the collapse of architectural elements during the long period in which Unravel lay buried. Much of its hydraulic engineering can now only be inferred by comparing it to other regional stepwells whose water systems survive more completely. This interplay of inferred function and preserved form reinforces the structure's dual identity. It served as a reservoir, yet its elaborate sculptural program suggests intentions that transcended practicality. Cosmological symbolism, dynastic memory, and ritual expression, particularly given its association with Queen Uriamati and the legacy it likely aimed to enshrine. When the stepwell was rediscovered in the 20th century after centuries underground, its excavation revealed another quiet mystery: the remarkable preservation of many sculptures, protected from weathering by the very silt that concealed them. Yet this uneven preservation complicates attempts to reconstruct the stepwell's original appearance. Some panels emerge pristine, others eroded or displaced long before burial occurred. The archaeological record remains uneven, leaving certain questions, such as the design of the vanished pavilions or the full arrangement of the upper friezes, open to interpretation through fragmentary evidence and parallels from other Solanke-era monuments. The stepwell's linear depth contributes to its enigmatic presence. The long visual axis from the surface to the well shaft required meticulous planning, yet without surviving construction record, scholars debate whether builders carved downward in sequential stages or worked simultaneously across multiple tiers. The absence of staging marks or construction inscriptions makes the problem difficult to resolve. This uncertainty illustrates the challenge of interpreting ancient engineering when physical evidence outlasts textual explanation, leaving the technical history of even the most ambitious structures partly veiled. The iconography deepens the enigma. While many motifs correspond to established symbolic roles, Dashavatas, Apsaras, Nagas, guardians, other panels blend narrative and ornament in unexpected ways, hinting at either a localized sculptural idiom or the confluence of multiple workshop traditions. With no sign panels or guild records, the identities and background of the artisans remain unknown, their stylistic signatures the only surviving clues to a complex artistic ecosystem. The relationship between the stepwell and its landscape introduces further layers. The Sarasvati River, which once fed the well, shifted course over the centuries, altering the hydrological context and obscuring how the stepwell originally functioned within its environment. Geological studies offer partial answers, but uncertainties remain: how frequently the well filled, how deep the water stood in different seasons, and how the structure operated during extended droughts. These practical realities would have shaped its ritual and social significance during its active life, yet now exist only as hypotheses. Light, too, played a role impossible to reconstruct fully. As sunlight passes across the terraces today, it reveals patterns of illumination and shadow that must once have been integral to the experience of the descent. But the original interplay of sun, reflective water, and lamplight cannot be recovered with precision. Seasonal shifts, ritual timings, and the presence of water would all have reshaped the visual dynamics in ways now irretrievable, adding another layer of distance between modern observers and the lived experience of the stepwell. In the stillness of its descent, Unravel retains an atmosphere of layered human intention and partial historical obscurity. Its craftsmanship speaks clearly, yet the deeper story, how its builders coordinated such an undertaking, how symbolism merged with ritual practice, how shifting water shaped its use, remains open. The mystery is grounded not in impossibility but in the limits of surviving record, allowing the stepwell to maintain a quiet, rooted wonder shaped by what endures and what has been lost. Set within the basalt heart of Garipuri Island, where tidal waters thread through mangroves before rising toward rugged slopes, the Elephanta Caves introduce themselves with an understated simplicity that gradually reveals a deeper intentionality. Their weathered pillars and shadowed chambers seem modest at first glance compared to mainland monuments, yet stepping into the central cave, where the colossal three-faced Maheshmurti emerges from the stone, shifts perception into a quieter, more introspective register. Here, the mystery lies not in the improbable, but in the interplay of geology, craftsmanship, and historical silence that shapes these 6th to 7th century structures. The caves hint at uncertainty through their very incompleteness. Unfinished pillars, abruptly halted reliefs, and transitions between refined carving and raw quarry surfaces suggest phases of work interrupted or reoriented by circumstances no longer recorded. Surviving inscriptions are too sparse to map a precise lineage of patronage. Stylistic comparisons link the complex to early Kalachuri or late Gupta influence, yet none of these identifications is definitive. This absence of certainty becomes the first thread in Elephanta's layered enigma. The main cave's mandapa, supported by rows of massive pillars, displays an architectural rhythm-balancing open space with sculptural density. Yet carving such a chamber into a hill of hard basalt on an island accessible only by water raises questions about both practical logistics and symbolic intent. Transporting artisans, tools, and provisions across the harbor required planning, while the basalt's hardness, variable grain, and fracture lines impose constraints on excavation. Ventilation, lighting, dust management, all necessary but undocumented, must have shaped the process. Only faint tool marks and subtle irregularities in pillar profiles hint at the methods used and the teams that worked here. At the heart of the cave, the great Maheshmurti anchors the space with calm authority. Its triadic expression, creation, preservation, destruction, emerges with refinement undiminished by damage suffered over time. Yet its placement is intriguingly off-center, a line along a spatial axis that interacts with natural light entering to the eastern portico. Whether this effect was intentional or incidental remains debated in the absence of ritual descriptions. The surrounding reliefs, Ravana lifting Mount Kailasa, Ganga descending through Shiva's hair, Ardhanarishvara, the wedding of Shiva and Parvati, form a coherent iconographic tapestry, yet manual differences in finish and detail suggest multiple workshops or generations. The panels feel unified in theme but not in execution, complicating efforts to treat the cave as a single-phase project. The subsidiary caves add to the sense of layered progression. Smaller shrines with lingas appear in chambers ranging from refined to barely begun, with outlines of abandoned sculptures indicating phases halted by shifts in patronage or regional conflict. Such interruptions align loosely with known historical turbulence, but cannot be tied directly without more documentation. These traces of halted work become quiet markers of historical discontinuity. The geology of Garapuri introduces another dimension. Basalt varies significantly in texture and fracture behavior across the island, influencing both the ease of carving and the longevity of sculptural detail. Weathering along exposed entrances complicates efforts to differentiate between original sculptural decisions and later erosion. The absence of preserved scaffolding holes or quarry debris limits what can be inferred about construction techniques, leaving only the finished and unfinished surfaces to speak for the process. Elephanta's location in the harbor approaches of ancient Mumbai raises broader cultural possibilities. While unmistakably a Shaivite sacred site, its position along maritime routes suggests roles that could have included ritual anchorage or symbolic guardianship for seafarers. Yet, without early textual references, its function, pilgrimage center, royal foundation, local shrine, remains uncertain. Later periods further obscured its context. Phases of neglect, repurposing, partial occupation, and damage under foreign powers layered additional complexity over its already fragmentary record. As dusk gathers in the main chamber and the contours of the Maheshmurti fade into shadow, the cave's atmosphere distills into a sense of depth born not of scale alone, but of the intentions, interruptions, and silences embedded in its stone. Elephanta endures as a place where technical mastery and incomplete history coexist, where early medieval sculpture resonates despite the absence of written explanation, and where the limits of surviving evidence leave space not for unfounded speculation, but for careful, grounded inquiry. It holds a gentle, persistent mystery shaped by tides, basalt, human devotion, and the quiet distances left by time.